Before we begin, yes, I have seen the Dragons Rising Season 4 Part 2 episodes. I will not be discussing them in this video to not spoil others, and because I think LEGO would strike me down if I did. With that being said, on with the video, and please do not leave spoilers in the comments. Thank you. Jay has certainly had the weirdest journey out of any of the old gen ninja in Dragons Rising. We're in episode 70 of the show at this point, and only now has the original team all come back together for the first time since Crystallized, all because Jay has been kept off the team for the large majority of Ninjago's ongoing story. Keeping him away from the rest of the team is certainly something I've praised plenty in the past, as I think his distance from the team and his memory loss arc gave him his most compelling stories to date. When season 3 wrapped up, I was pretty convinced that the show had actually saved Jay from the slump his character was in, and I was really excited to see where his story would go from there. I was pretty convinced at this point that they had saved Jay. However, they made the baffling move to restore his memory in a meager 4 episodes as soon as the next part came out, going against everything I'd praised his arc for prior to this season. With his memory story seemingly coming to a close for now, I want to give his season 4 material an in-depth look, but the colossal fumbling of this arc kinda got me thinking about his entire story. So while I want to discuss season 4, I also want to take a more holistic approach to his arc, because I think ultimately the show was never really in a position where it had actually saved Jay. I suppose the most apt place to start is the very core of what his story is about and build out from there. The story they were clearly aiming to tell with Jay was one about his identity. Granted, most stories with memory loss have a heavy focus on one's identity and who they really are, but for the first time in Ninjago's history, a memory loss arc has been given the opportunity to be really fleshed out and developed, making it the perfect time to delve deep into Jay as a character, which is an interesting move because it's always been a bit all over the place. By having Jay take on a consistently more antagonistic role, akin to what he had in Skybound, we get to see a side of him that's never been touched on much by the show. In those earlier seasons of the show, he was certainly a protagonist who was fighting against the forces of evil, but he was always kind of self-serving, and he would serve as a bit of a linchpin for the conflict within the team. Taking Skybound as a primary example here, the very crux of his arc that season is that he feels entitled to Nia's love because of the vision he got in the cave, which allows Nadakant to then come in and get the upper hand at several points throughout the season, which pushes everyone away from Jay because of his own selfish actions. There are certainly a few similarities between this and his portrayal in Dragons Rising throughout his Shattered Goodness and his Rogue Persona arc, with core parts of those stages of his arc being very reminiscent of what we saw in Skybound. Throughout Dragons Rising and Jay's journey in that show, Jay takes on 3 different roles as it were, those being his managerial position at the administration, Raz's fighter in the Tournament of Sorcerers, and then Rogue before he eventually rejoins the ninja team and subsequently becomes a ninja again. Working as a manager at the administration is the hook for his story arc, and we're introduced to him briefly in season 1 and then again in season 2, and from both of these we learn that Jay is living a pretty unfulfilling life all things considered. He moans about his work and his paperwork, and having to work in this fluorescently lit office, and we get the revelation that he knows about his powers. While he doesn't play a major role in the story just yet, the mystery of his lost memories is set up, and he's immediately presented as antagonistic adjacent via the administration. It's some solid setup for the future involvement as the story progresses, and in the latter half of the season we get to see this play out a bit more as he joins Raz, but I definitely think this is where the first cracks in his story start to show. The last we saw of Jay as an agent is in a cave under Mysterium and working for the administration, so seeing him now work for Raz is a pretty big leap. So how did we get here exactly? We don't really know. We're told that Raz has found and manipulated him, so like, okay, sure, why not? We know his previous job wasn't very fulfilling to him, so ditching that to be an elemental warrior isn't the biggest leap we could make, but we never get to see this meeting actually happen between the two. The most we get is a clunky recounting of events during Jay and Nia's fight, so it's pretty hard to get invested in what's actually happening when every part of the story's presentation is so awkward to watch. After Jay exposits all of this, he loses his match and is sent away, which I'm completely fine with. I think that generally speaking, they did what they needed to do for the first big appearance he had in season 2, and while it is pretty awkward, Jay has now fully been reintroduced into the plot and we can move forward with whatever the story has planned out for him. The path forward for his story seems pretty clear, with him detesting the ninja and being somewhat loyal to Raz. So while this first part of Jay's story has been a little bit disjointed, it gets the necessary setup out of the way and sets up the direction for the rest of his story, which his Rogue persona will presumably pick up on in season 3. This is absolutely where the highlight of Jay's story is, and it's where most of my praise for his characterization in Dragons Rising lies, because it provides the deepest dive into his character and identity. It's certainly the most morally grey he's ever been, because his time with Raz was pretty evil oriented, and while his agent persona is probably less evil on a surface level, his department sentenced a bunch of people to death in the name of the evil megacorp that is the administration, so I wouldn't say he was just an innocent bystander in all of that. This is the first persona of his that's purely self-serving, as he isn't doing this in the name of Raz or the administration. He is doing this for the love of the game and his own monetary gain, which he makes clear throughout the latter half of Season 3. It's made clear throughout this second half that Jay has no interest in whatever identity people keep pushing onto him, making it clear that he's his own person with his own moral code and set of beliefs. Over the course of multiple episodes, we see him slowly rebuild his relationship with Nia and the team throughout the Lee arc, coming to a head in a really satisfying heart-to-heart about Jay not being the same person as he once was, but wanting to make things work anyways. It ends off on a high note, and I am super satisfied with where his arc leaves off. And with the ending of Season 3, it leaves plenty of room for 4 to come in and expand on its ideas. I've praised this part of Jay's story a bunch before, and I want to make it clear that the story told is something I stand by to be a fantastic one, and I truly do think that it brought Jay out of the gutter for me. But it's certainly not without its issues, which unfortunately I've kind of neglected to talk about in the past. I mentioned earlier that it's unfortunate how we don't see him go from point A to B in Season 2, and to the same effect, Season 3 has the same issue but far, far worse, because this portion of his arc is almost completely disconnected from everything that came before, and it directly contradicts everything we knew about him up until this point. Going into Season 3, there are 3 pieces of information that are made clear to us in the first 2 seasons of Dragons Rising. The first one is that Jay is a negligent and unsatisfied worker. The second one is that he's loyal to Raz and his wolf clan, and the third and final one, which is the most important, is that he hates the ninja for destroying that relationship that he had with Raz. Come Dragons Rising Season 3, his introduction into the story is him ruthlessly hunting Raz for money. While yes, Raz did throw him away unjustly, and his shattered soul could make that sadness he felt turn into anger, his previous partnership with Raz isn't relevant to the bounty hunter plot at all, and his feelings of indebtedness haven't been mentioned once since he was let go. Contrasting this, he is completely content to work with a ninja despite them being the root cause of his current situation. He's self-serving, yes, but Season 4 opens with him telling us he struggles with loneliness caused by not being part of a team and a family, so why not build off of that in Season 3 in relation to his previous allies in the Wolf Clan? In theory, all of their plotlines can still work with a bit of tweaking, but to not make the foundations you laid earlier in the story relevant is just completely asinine to me. Matter of fact, Jay's arc about rebuilding his relationships and wanting to be better to those around him would be far more compelling if he started off the season by truly hating the ninja, as he would have a much more drastic shift in his feelings towards them as the season goes on. As for his laid back and negligent nature as an office worker, as soon as the plot requires it, he knows exactly where he sent Aaron's parents, a plot point that comes completely out of left field. I've justified it in the past by saying that he would know where they were from having to refile their information so many times, which sure, he could have, but that doesn't really justify it when he was in charge of displacing an entire community of people down to the land of Lee, and he has no conceivable way of knowing that those 2 people specifically were Aaron's parents. It's so unfortunate that this plot hole exists, because they go to the administration anyways, so just use the screen time that would have been used on this info dump about Lee, and use it for them finding out where they might have been sent after the merge. If they absolutely could not fit them finding out their location from the administration into the story, have Jay use the knowledge that couples were sent to Lee as a potential lead and reason to go there and check it out. That's a piece of knowledge that I could buy Jay having, and it means that he doesn't just know exactly where this random kid's parents were sent for no reason whatsoever. So many aspects of his story in Season 3 would work far better with just some minor tweaks, which can be said about a lot of things in Season 3 really. To make myself abundantly clear, it is an extremely strong character arc when contained to the season. However, from a narrative point of view, it has so little cohesion with what the rest of the show had set up beforehand, and it's just so incredibly weak from that point of view. Unfortunately, none of the praise I have about the Season 3 story arc being good can be carried over to Dragons Rising Season 4 Jay's story arc, but all of the same criticisms apply. Up until this point, my main praise was about how they went above and beyond to explore a side of Jay that had never really gotten the arc that it deserves, and we really got to explore how his memory loss affects him and others. Come for 4th season, however, I get the impression that they completely turned heel on what had been built up to, and ended up really damaging my appreciation of his storyline as a whole. As I said earlier, they made the completely baffling move to end his entire storyline in only 4 episodes of television. They really have a thing for ending good plotlines of 4th episodes of a part, huh? From the get-go, this season makes it clear to us that Jay wants his memory back. Why, you might be asking? Loneliness. His whole thing about loneliness in part 2 really falls flat to me when his ties to a wolf clan were never really addressed, and while I can see what they were going for, with the strength and connections or whatever, he outright said at the end of season 3 that his memories aren't important to him being a good person and rebuilding his relationships with the ninja. I can only assume what's happened here is that they conflated his presence on the team with his desire to get his memories back, which just outright sucks because Jay showed no interest in his memories prior, and being on the ninja team shouldn't necessarily mean having his memories back. Matter of fact, it'd be really interesting if he was on the team and didn't have them, like he was in season 3 part 2. Some parts of the season seem to make it a self-esteem issue, with him having sucked at everything prior, but Jay chasing this ideal version of himself that he doesn't know aside from what people have told him simply isn't what his arc has been about in any capacity. A scene that's very clearly meant to be a driving motive in getting his memories back is the knowledge of knowing how to do spinjitzu, deemed a core part of what being a ninja required, but this just simply isn't true within the story Dragons Rising has been telling for the last, 60 episodes now? Every single major arc in this show has been about how there isn't one set path to being a ninja. Aaron doesn't have elemental powers, Sora doesn't need spinjitzu, and Lloyd doesn't need to be the next Wu. So much of this show's messaging is about how everyone is strong in their own way through kindness, hope, etc. And so neither Nia nor Kai saying that his drive to be a better person and be a part of a team is enough is just kind of a bummer to see, and it goes against most of what this show's messaging has been so far. The idea of wanting to be your best self is one that I'm sure many can relate to, so I could see what they might have been trying to do here, but the problem is that the current Jay and the Jay we once knew aren't exactly the same people. The show does go out of its way to tell us that this is still the same guy we once knew, but there are things that make this Jay unique, and having his memories back would destroy those unique aspects that he has. Trying to be the best you is important, yes, but I do feel like it's not a particularly great message to be sending that you can only be your best self at the cost of everything that currently makes you yourself. The ideal scenario here would have been a nuancing of who he was and who he currently is instead of his ultimatum scenario, where Jay is stuck in this mentality of not wanting to be himself and chasing what he deems to be his best self, an identity he doesn't have any knowledge of aside from what people have told him, and one he showed no interest in for most of the show. There is a complete disregard of everything that made Jay who he currently is, and every factor that's made him unique is deemed as something he either sucked at or made him unhappy. He certainly wasn't a good person, and self-improvement was where I wanted and expected his arc to go, but this is kind of the worst way they could have gone about telling that story. The show has gone through great pains to make sure we know his self-fulfillment isn't dependent on his memories, so him turning tail and suddenly needing them back to feel like he has a family really was not for play in my opinion. Not only could they have explored this angle through the Wolf Clan, they also could have explored it through the administration. They say that he feels like there's someone out there for him in season 4, but it would have been far more interesting to see him actually reintegrate the team if he actually made more meaningful connections with people beforehand. We're presented with this friend of his who worked at the administration, but that's all just a ruse and he's actually one of the people behind the memory wipe scandal. I'm not saying that Jay necessarily needed to have a lover or anything, but if he did have meaningful friendships or even romantic relationships with people, his story about rejoining the ninja team because it's where he feels the most at home would have been a home run in a season focused on connection and relationships being a core strength within everyone. I'm sure I've already gotten a few comments by now about how Jay was always going to get his memories back, and to expect otherwise is unrealistic. And yes, that's true, but that's not the point I'm here to make. Jay's memories were always going to return, yes, that much was made abundantly clear through Ninjago's storytelling history, but the way they went about doing it shows a complete lack of care and regard for what came before, and overall just has a really poor message behind it, leaving his memory loss arc off on a low note. Now, ultimately I want to make it clear that his story obviously isn't over. As I'm sure many of you have thought at this point, his shattered goodness is still an ongoing thread, but I don't really have much of a reason to care about that at this time. The only contributions it's really made to the story have been making him slightly more obnoxious to be around for the ninja, a trait that was part of his character in Days of Old but now has a lore reason behind it, I suppose, and it being brought up as a, ooh, can we trust this guy, which doesn't really matter now because he has his memories back. I'm sure they can do something with it, but the bulk of the story was focused on the lost memories aspect of his story, and those are back now, so there's not really a whole lot they can do with him. He's already basically reverted back to being his old self, so I don't really see much of a path forward for him. Funnily enough, I think that Jay's arc is one that just didn't really have much of an identity to it, and I'm not really sure what my takeaway from it should be. Most of Dragons Rising's arcs have had the message that everyone has strengths and that your weaknesses shouldn't hold you back. Whether that be strength in your kindness, your growth, your desire to be a better person, or the people around you, the show's been very consistent in what it's tried to say. So while I can certainly award this arc for being creative with a message that you as a person suck and need to change everything about yourself as soon as humanly possible, I don't particularly support it, and the various stages we go through to get to that point are completely disconnected from one another. The direction of the story changes radically between parts, and none of it really makes any sense when you lay out the stages in any sort of detail. While the actual character arc Jay went through in Season 3 is extremely well written and all that, the way it's told is completely disjointed and is just kind of nonsensical from a narrative standpoint. I think the real cherry on top is that even when Jay does get his memories back, the events he reminisces on are things that just straight up did not happen. It's so funny to me that Ninjago has a 15-year history under his belt at this point, and they need to invent memories for Jay to laugh and cry about at random intervals. As I said earlier, I don't think it's completely wraps for him, since we still have his shattered goodness to deal with, and we still don't know why his memories were stripped from him, but I cannot in good faith call him saved when the bulk of his story was hastily wrapped up in a 4-episode arc with a terrible message on top. Much like my complaints with Raz, this one specific issue got me thinking about the bigger picture of Dragons Rising, and it's led me to wonder how planned out Dragons Rising actually is. I'm sure there is a plan, I'm not denying that, but if I'm being honest, I don't think the plan goes beyond like broad strokes and bullet points for characters to hit each season. I don't think there's a lot of planning on how everything connects together, and judging by Jay's story, I feel like this is the case. Watching a lot of the stuff past Dragons Rising Season 2 seems to vindicate this train of thought for the most part, because a lot of the characters tend to really change their tune between seasons and even season parts, even if it isn't to the extent that it is with Jay. I can't really confirm or deny this theory since obviously I don't work on the show, and nothing much has been said about this larger plan, but I'm very curious to see how the end of Dragons Rising will tie everything together, because I think that'll be the definitive answer if I ever want to revisit this planning topic when it's all said and done. That's all from me though, so thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye for now. Alright, so just, yeah, the usual ending bit is coming, right? However, I kind of forgot the one I was going to do for the last video, so I'm just gonna like play the clip that it's a part of, and you all are gonna have to pretend that it makes sense with the video you just watched. Okay, cool, yeah, great, I'll play it now, bye.